I had a guy the other day telling me something, how can China be happy? How can Chinese people be happy when they're so badly oppressed? And I said, look, don't argue with me. I live in China and I see it every day. Probably about 5 years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, that I suddenly started to realize that everything I was reading was misinformation. And I only came to Twitter 5 years ago during the first part of COVID because I was bored. And it was then that I started to become an active participant in social media. I get labeled, I've been called all kinds of things. I'm the Beijing influencer who sees China through rose-colored glasses. That was one. At the time that article was written, I had 4,000 followers on Twitter. That was it. And they called me a Beijing influencer. So I'm not really sure where they got that from. Then I was called a retired security guard. I've been called a bike riding retiree. So that they don't want to give me the credit for having any degree of intelligence, qualifications, experience. Most of them believe what they see because it's repeated 1,000 times. The old, I think it was Goebbels said, if you repeat a lie 1,000 times, it becomes a truth. And also there's the other thing that he's credited with, but he didn't actually say it this way, accuse your enemy of what you are doing. And that is something that America are very, very good at. They will organize for people, academics, to write a thesis. So there's an academic study into something. That academic study then gets used by the media. And then the academic will say, look, the media are, so this is called circular referencing. The media are pushing this story out, so this story must be true. And then the media push more stories out, referring back to the original source, which was not true in the first place. And then we get this circular referencing thing going on. And I think that's probably that's something that America are extremely good at. They've had probably 100 years, maybe at least 70 years of controlling the media and controlling how they feed information to the media through their leaks, through their academic reports. The State Department, the CIA, the National Endowment for Democracy, they will create a story, and then that story becomes a truth, even though it's not a truth. And everyone believes it because it's everywhere. They say, well, hang on, it's on Fox and it's on CNN. So China is bad on Fox and China is bad on CNN. And you've got both sides of the political spectrum saying China must be bad. It's the only thing Americans can agree on. China is bad. But 70% of them, if you say, well, do you believe weapons of mass destruction? Of course I don't. Do you believe the Tonkin incident? Of course I don't. Do you believe that your government handled COVID well? Of course I don't. But you believe China is bad. It is, because it's everywhere. Well, all of those other things were everywhere too. And you don't believe them now, but you still believe this. So which one of us, I live in China and you're telling me China is bad. Which one of us has the experience and the knowledge to say the truth? And yeah, but you're paid to say it. Okay, I'm not going to win this argument. So I just let that one go. But people who ask genuine questions always get a genuine answer. When I came to China in 2004, it was developing. It didn't have the infrastructure that it has now. It didn't have the high-speed trains. It didn't have a lot of the bridges that it's got. It didn't have a lot of the freeways. And I've watched as this has developed and changed. I was in, about 15 years ago, I went to a village in Guangdong in a small city called Qingyuan. And I went to this village up a mountain dirt track in a bread van. And we went up this village, up this road, and it was just a slithery, and there's a drop off one side. It was like really, really worrying. And we got to the very top, and there's this very old village. It was a tough place. People had animals living in their houses. Getting deliveries to the top was done on a horse, and the horse would go up the hill with these like backpacks on. And it was a really, really trip for me down memory lane to 1,000 years ago. Very little has changed in this village in 1,000 years. I went back there. We were halfway up the mountain on a 4-lane highway, 2 lanes up, 2 lanes down. And my wife was sitting next to me. I said, have we been here before? And it was the same village we went to 15 years ago. And it now looks like this. It's now got, we found a coffee shop. It's got bed and breakfasts. It's got restaurants. Now, what's happened here is people can now leave the big cities and go and experience the rural charm of China without that harsh living environment that they used to have. So this entire village has been lifted out of poverty. It still has the farming, but it's no longer their only source of income. They're no longer surviving on a crop of rice from a terraced field. Same thing in Longji, in Guangxi, same thing in Guizhou, same thing all over China. And it is all over China. I've seen the same things happening in Xinjiang, Gansu. Ningxia is a great example, which was a poverty. The region of Ningxia, Shui Autonomous Region, was terribly, terribly impoverished. I've been quite famous for riding bikes across China several times. But when you do that, you get to meet people, talk to people, and learn about, I learn about rural China. I learn about poverty alleviation. I learn about things that people in Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen don't learn. They don't see that. I've sat in roadside stores in the middle of Xinjiang, in the middle of Guangxi, in the middle of Heilongjiang and Xinjiang. A huge problem with Xinjiang in Western media. I've been to Xinjiang several times. I've cycled through Xinjiang. There is no oppression. There is no persecution. I know that. You probably know that. Anybody who's been to Xinjiang can clearly see that. But they will say, Xinjiang is very difficult to get to, and there are restrictions. It's difficult to get to because geographically, it's 5 hours flying time from Beijing. It's about 6 hours flying time from Guangzhou. It's difficult to get to because it's remote. It's not difficult to get to because China stops you from going there. Now, when I've talked to people outside of the mosque and they say, they're going in and out of the mosque, and there's no problems with that at all. They're allowed to do it. I had a guy the other day telling me something, how can China be happy? How can Chinese people be happy when they're so badly oppressed? And I said, look, don't argue with me. I live in China and I see it every day. Go to the Ipsos Global Happiness Index and have a look and see what that says about China, because that's a French organization that has interviewed or surveyed 32 different countries, and China is number one. Now, you can accuse me of being a liar, but before you accuse me, you have to discredit an international and reputable organization that has said the same as I'm saying. Go discredit them, because once you do that, then you can call me a liar. And if you can't discredit Harvard or Yale that are saying there is a 95% satisfaction rate with the government, if you can't discredit the Harvard Business Review, you can't discredit me. It's as simple as that. These are the facts. China has a murder rate that does not register on the scale. So crime in China, there's very little street crime. There's very little violent crime, house crime, burglaries, very little crime, very little indeed. Not to say it doesn't exist, but it happens. Now, if we take a look at this from a broader, a global perspective, 151 countries and regions have signed up for the Belt and Road Initiative. And why would they do that if they didn't like China? If they thought China was some kind of threat, some kind of danger to them, why would they do that? So 3/4 of the world are benefiting from their relationship with China, and about 15% of the world are very negative on China. I saw that Xi Jinping has announced that we're going to focus on the underdeveloped world for the rest of, for the growth of trade. And that is great because it brings the underdeveloped world out of their poverty situations, which the developed world has kept them in. So China doesn't need to propagate itself to the world. What it needs to do is fight this propaganda that comes, the misleading and misinformation that comes from Western media.